Welcome back, everyone. This week, we're talking about Trulieve, the Republicans' boogeyman. Are they a monopoly? Rectal cranial inversion often leads people to say nonsensical shit. Today is a case study of just that. Below, I've diagnosed such rectal cranial inversion, and that's assuming good faith. Here this Christina, don't know how to pronounce the last name, says, we'll call her Christina, says, Trulieve is trying to community note this, but they're not being honest. The truth is, Amendment 3 would create a monopoly on Florida's marijuana market, as Casey DeSantis pointed out. If it's not about controlling the market, why would Amendment 3 ban home growing? All right, there we go. We got some premises in that. The factual accuracy, which is questionable. So, first of all, Amendment 3 doesn't ban homegrown. It's already banned. And the reason that it's not on the ballot is because of the single subject requirement. But I'm sure she already knows this. Her insincere, disingenuous, and rhetorical question is more of a posturing remark than an intellectually honest question. This is why arguing about the facts often doesn't matter. It isn't that people don't have the facts or that the facts aren't readily accessible. It's that oftentimes the facts don't align with their preconceived notions, ideological standpoint, or perverse incentives. It's not about having substantive discussion about the facts, but coercive manipulation through diversion, deflection, redirection, misdirection, straw manning, red herrings, and establishing a moral high ground through switch tracking. And we'll be covering those we'll be providing examples for that today. Let me ask you this. Does the below image imply Trulieve has a monopoly? Roughly 22% of state dispensaries with 34% of state sales. That's not a monopoly. Now, of course, this is only if you treat the word monopoly by its definition. You could be like most people and use the word monopoly as a placeholder word by making a factually false but sentimentally true statement which relies on the reader to infer an underlying message which emotionally resonates with them. Of course, these people are doing so to a group of listeners and readers who either aren't wise enough or who are too ideologically pathologized to not know or care to know the difference. But hey, who openly confesses to running a PSYOP? That would defeat the whole purpose. This all started when I saw this tweet by Christina. She says, so here's the thing. Amendment 3 would create a monopoly on recreational. It also doesn't allow home growing. Why is it that other states that have passed recreational marijuana also allow individuals to home grow, but Florida's Amendment 3 specifically does not? It's not about freedom, it's about corporate greed. First of all, making monopoly plural by saying monopolies, like it's done in the embedded tweet, contradicts the definition of monopoly and thus invalidates the very claim itself. Second of all, this is a great example of switch tracking and talking past each other. Here she is asking insincere, loaded and rhetorical questions in a pseudo-virtue signaling fashion. It's a nice touch of her to correlate the lack of homegrown not to the single subject rule, but alternatively due to corporate greed. Who doesn't appreciate a beautiful display of propagandic spin and misdirection? There's nothing better than a question which presupposes its own answer. Then we have this from her. Christina says, reading comprehension failed. I pointed out a fact about the amendment. Thanks for highlighting it and admitting that Amendment 3 is purely about lining your own pockets at Floridians' expense. Oh, by the way, before I go any farther, I'm only pointing out one or two of the issues in any one of her tweets. There's actually numerous issues and entangled issues of multiple layers, but I'm not going to completely spurg out on this. So you'll have to forgive me, and I hope that the depth in which I'm analyzing or opinionating on this is enough. So yes, more switch tracking. Never underestimate the extent of disingenuous degeneracy that others are willing to lower themselves to. In this case, saying such things as Amendment 3 is purely about lining your own pockets is a factually false statement. Didn't more than $80 million of lobbying money line somebody else's pockets too? Thus, it's no longer purely. Time and time again, these people have been corrected on it not being a monopoly, and yet they refuse to stop using that word. An oligopoly is to a monopoly what a limited democracy is to a dictatorship. It might not be ideal, but it's definitely not the same. The devil is in the details, and lots of people are light on the details. In the below image, they are contradicting their claims of monopoly by saying few select corporations. Vote no on 3 says corporations only spend money to make money. Mega marijuana corporations have spent over $75 million trying to push through Amendment 3. Why? Because if Amendment 3 passes, it would grant a few select corporations a constitutionally protected monopoly and a ton of money. Yet again, I'm only going to touch on a couple of issues per tweet, even though I really want to go off the deep end. So here we go. Big weed and corporate greed. It's like they say, if it rhymes, it must be true. And if you can add a SpongeBob SquarePants gif, then all the better. Am I right or am I right? Then vote no on 3 says, big weed and corporate greed are joining forces to push Amendment 3. Say no to monopolies and yes to competition that's fair for consumers. Okay, so I didn't note this here, but I can't help myself. So, if they say no to Amendment 3, then it will just remain a medical marijuana market in which Trulieve is the top dog. Do we think that by it remaining the way it is, that Trulieve is not going to maintain its position and or advance its position, especially when you factor in that a lot of these companies are kind of counting on this occurring in hopes of making some money, whether that be cash from operations or actual net income, to actually have a return on capital. So I would actually say that by making it recreational, does not necessarily make it fair to consumers, because say no to monopolies and yes to competition that's fair for consumers. So one could infer that if you say no to Amendment 3, then you will keep it in the condition in which it's fair for consumers. That's interesting. Or they're implying, even though they have a blue check mark, so they could write more than 280 characters, and they could write at least 280 characters, but, well, normally propaganda needs very few words, so you really can't risk that. So they could be saying, strike down Amendment 3 so that way we can write it correctly. But it's like, well, hasn't the legislation had ample time to do this themselves? Well, they didn't. That's why it turned to a vote, and that's why it's going to the Constitution and such matters. The government could have done stuff about this. They chose not to. They forced the hands of the citizens. That's what's occurring here. So we'll try again for a new Amendment 3, 2026 or 2027. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, let's move on. Here's more talk about monopolies, but let me first say that Bueno for Miami is quite catchy. She says, Dear Ron DeSantis, you've done some really great things in Florida, but if you stand behind the creation of a monopoly to benefit the MMTCs who have given you millions in donations, you're just as bad as the same tyrants that brought many of us to Florida in the first place. Go woke, go broke, right? Then tell me why you're going woke with Trulieve. Why is it that their money is worth more to you than your principles? Since when are monopolies a good thing for Florida or for anyone except for the company who gets that monopoly? So this is what I've been talking about. People will make all sorts of biased and fallacy-filled appeals rather than cite information that already exists, not conjecture, but actual facts and legitimate concerns which are relevant and proximal to the topic. And not just isolated facts, a comprehensive modeling that includes as many facts as reasonably possible. Most people are right at the exclusion of information, not the inclusion of information. This is essentially what spin is in the propagandic sense, meaning they're right because they've ignored or dismissed pertinent details that, if included, would disqualify their conclusion or at least make it harder to reach. Yet, time and time again, people fail at this. It really does show how little concerned with facts people are, and thus how few they use and know. My go-to example of this being right at the exclusion of information, not the inclusion of information, is you're a penguin. You're a penguin insofar as I don't include information as to why you're not a penguin. After all, you both have brains, eyes, raise your offspring, etc. As such, many cannabis proponents and opponents engage in this partial and incomplete promotion of a goal. And what they lack in facts, they make up for in caring and intentions and passion. I suspect that this quote-unquote monopoly talk is a distraction, deflection, and red herring because it uses an unrelated and irrelevant concern to distract from the true motivations behind the opposition to marijuana legalization. They're trying to appeal to a broader audience while masking their personal bias. This is classic frame shifting. A good old rhetorical smokescreen and ostensible argument. That's what much of this is. Below, you'll see Canna Investments diplomatically try to educate this woman that she's using the wrong word, i.e. monopoly, and that she should be saying an oligopoly and not monopoly. But how are you supposed to talk shit on oligopolistic structures when practically no one even knows what that means? Therefore, it is a monopoly. Plus, it changes the target from an individual to a group, which makes it harder to throw around accusations. Unless you lump them all together and call them, oh, I don't know, mega marijuana. No, I didn't make that up. Mega marijuana is a real piece of propaganda. Mega marijuana corporations are bankrolling Amendment 3 in an effort to rewrite Florida Constitution to give them control of Florida's marijuana market. By banning homegrown options, grant exclusive license to select corporations, and pouring millions into passing this constitutional amendment, these mega marijuana corporations are paving the way for multi-billion-dollar monopoly for themselves. Amendment 3 is not about freedom, it's about greed. I like this next one. It's a nice simple piece of propaganda. Mega marijuana corporations monopoly. Get a monopoly, grant special licensees to corporations, ban home grow, fund a constitutional amendment. Beautiful piece right there. So this below piece is where Canna Investment tries to correct her improper and inaccurate speech. He says, I think he's pointing out it's an oligopoly technically, not a monopoly. More licenses on the way currently that will double that. Certainly not a free market to your point. I don't think an unregulated D8 market is the answer either though. Both should be held to some standards. And then this Bueno for Miami says, the cannabinoid is held to standards. The state of Florida issues permits to establishments and we must follow their regulations. So she doesn't understand that Delta 8 is a cannabinoid, but not the same Delta 9, and as a consequence of the Farm Bill and such matters, that D8 is less regulated than D9. I don't think she understands that. That's just now dawning on me, reading this remark of hers, when she says the cannabinoid is held to standards. Like, the cannabinoid? So all of them? They're all held to the same, they're all held to standards? Like, okay, what standards? Sufficient standards? That's the problem. It's like, okay, fine, they're standards, but are they sufficient? It's like, anyway, yeah. That's why you have to question the concepts in a statement as much as the statement itself. In this case, is the word standard of sufficient extent to whatever desired goal? Anyway, the state of Florida issues permits to establishments and we must follow their regulations. The state is looking to quash the competition so that only MMTCs can operate. And in a move to pretend that MMTCs are somehow good actors, they eliminated the website collecting adverse reactions. Yes, the state of Florida is complicit with the MMTCs who are poisoning patients. Here's a link to the Wayback Machine proving the site was once active. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not going to do it. But what I will say is this. She's not addressing his comment about an oligopoly. She's redirecting, frame shifting, and switch tracking the conversation. If the state is looking to quash the competition so that only MMTCs, medical marijuana treatment centers, can operate, does that automatically make it a monopoly? No, because as the earlier image showed, there are 22 MMTCs. And as Ken Investment said, I believe there's 22 unfilled licenses now and more to come. So those could be given to, I don't know, other people. But yet again, that's a government decision, not a Trulieve decision. But she dodged the question and alternatively shifted the conversation in a non sequitur fashion, deceptively so because it's tangentially associated, to discuss whether they're good actors. Yes, she's trying to establish a moral high ground where she can be the judge and arbiter of what they should and shouldn't do. I'm a good person and they're not, therefore I get to tell them what to do. Of course, that presupposes that she is a good person, but her goodness is a relative measure against their badness. You see, she's good because they're bad. End of conversation. Their badness immediately defaults her to a baseline of good. I identify you as bad by default, implicitly, I'm now good. That's how this works, people. If you've never had an argument or a conversation with practically, the human population, then, well, you're not paying attention because that happens a lot, especially in your more intimate relationships, let's say. So instead of discussing the merits of the ideas, these sorts of people default to subjectively implicating themselves as being morally superior. As far as she's concerned, she's fighting for good because she's a good person. Therefore, anyone who opposes her must by default be a bad person, right? Well, under that line of logic, yes. She mentions monopolies 3 times. It seems to be an important talking point, and yet she's unwilling to discuss the merits of that talking point. Something as simple as getting them to say oligopoly instead of monopoly becomes an insurmountable task. The reason is simple. Monopoly has a certain connotation and emotional resonation to it. Oligopoly doesn't. This is what subterfuge looks like via specious arguments. This is what grandstanding and preying on the ignorance of their constituents looks like. This is the force-fitting of inaccurate and irrelevant talking points looks like. And if her concerns is about monopolies, then what about fried chicken? That's right. Here we have, if DeSantis and his crew think Trulieve is a monopoly, they should go after Chick-fil-A for having too many stores compared to their fried chicken competitors in Florida. Chick-fil-A has 240 locations, Zaxby's has 105, PDQ has 55, Guthrie's has 5, and Dave's Hot Chicken has 4. Stop with the nonsense and allow the free state of Florida and its business to thrive. Cracking down on chicken restaurants isn't politically expedient, though. So here we go. We're figuring this all out. It's all about appeals to emotion and doing things which have political coverage and are expedient. And yet again, that's how a lot of people operate a lot of the time. This isn't a stupid liberals or a corrupt government. This is people acting like people. Anyway, so cracking down on chicken restaurants isn't politically expedient though. But what it does reveal is the fact that their appeals to morality are a means to an end and not a transcending principle that they actually believe in. Their appeals are tools to coerce your perception and thus your behavior. I find the following to be a nice example of a categorical imperative, although they do say it's a tip, LOL. GOP tips for November. What does the Florida GOP recommend on November amendments? So they're just telling you what to do, like a puppet. Remember that puppet comment, because I got another little piece of propaganda for you here at the end. little foreshadowing. Here's the shot heard around the cannabis world, or the ethnocentric cannabis world, because I wonder how much Germany cares about this, or Australia, or the UK, or non-America. He says, Ron DeSantis says, Amendment 3, written by the CEO of a weed company that has poured $70 million and counting into the effort so that the company gets a constitutionally protected monopoly on the market. This is bad policy and even worse, constitutional law. There's that monopoly word again. Here he is tacitly admitting that his state's amendments are written by vested interests and corporations and not elected politicians. To admit that a state which he's the overseer of is a crony capitalist corporatocracy is a very interesting choice, because that is what he did do just now in that tweet. Like, very strange of him to be so open with that, but yeah, what do I know? One of the first comments in response to that Ron's comment has a picture from a wildfire. Talk about fictional hyperbole. Here we have Mr. Mark. Fellow Floridians, do we want our public spaces to smell worse than onion-eating skunk feces? Our beaches smelling worse than fetid tofu mixed with baby poo? A yes vote on Amendment 3 means pot smoke in your face anytime, anywhere, and nothing you can do. You want beach 1 or beach 2? As we noted earlier, if it rhymes, it must be true. And you know what? Do and to rhymes, so awkward. So the disingenuousness of people is tragic. I actually suspect that onion-eating skunk feces doesn't smell that terrible from any reasonable distance. Does that matter? No. Why? Because once again, people are using words not for their definitions or reality, but to coerce your emotions subtextually and subconsciously. Here's where they get their smoky photo from. Smoke from the Canadian wildfires has blanketed Florida with haze and air quality alerts. Blah, blah, blah. So, that's what it's going to look like. Let's not forget that 11.3% of Floridians smoke cigarettes. Do the beaches look like that? Don't forget that over 900,000 Floridians also have medical marijuana cards. Do the beaches look like that? Add on top of that, roughly 1.5 to 2 million Floridians consume cannabis illegally. Do the beaches look like that? If not, what will it take? Here's a comment from a MJ Biz Daily article from over a year ago. A Trulieve Cannabis Corp. sponsored marijuana legalization campaign in Florida is actually an effort to mislead voters into helping tighten the company's monopolistic stranglehold on the state's cannabis market, the state attorney general alleged in court filings this week. Monopolistic stranglehold? As I noted earlier, is a 22% market share of stores and a 34% market share of sales a monopoly? Is that a monopolistic stranglehold? Here's an adorable quote from the article. Quote, in its pursuit of a larger customer base and greater profits, Trulieve has invited millions of Floridians to join it in reckless violation of federal criminal law, end quote. Whittaker continued. Okay, so this just dawned on me. So that article, what did I say, a year ago? Pretty sure when that article was written, it was medically legal. So isn't that funny? That now I'm not sure who was that, legislative or was that a vote? Oh boy, I should know this. Way to look like a moron. Either way, so has invited millions of Floridians to join it in reckless violation of federal criminal law. Well, the medical program is reckless violation of federal criminal law. So, what does that imply about government officials? What does that imply about the citizens and the Floridians? Like, what does that imply? So you just essentially accused millions of your citizens to be reckless violators of federal criminal law. That's what you just said. Millions of you Floridians are reckless violators of federal criminal law. That's interesting. That's an interesting way to talk to your constituents. Now, even though I just fixated on that, it's funny because I almost missed it the first time I saw it, and then even rereading it, I was like, why am I quoting this? Because the quote starts off, in its pursuit of a larger customer base and greater profits. You see that? Profits. Greater profits. LOL. Trulieve doesn't even have profits. Like, how... And we're going to get into this in a moment. So Dr. James V. Baker says, the primary identifier of a greedy monopolistic company is huge profits. Characterizing Trulieve as such a company is absurd, since it has lost $685 million since opening for business in 2016. Okay, so back to this phrase, greater profits. Greater is a modifying adjective of the word profit, which presupposes that there are profits. Greater is a comparative word too. The presence of profits is in the first place is necessary to establish a baseline for something to be greater than. As I keep noting though, these tactics aren't a red versus blue dynamic, but broadly a human tendency. Take for instance, you're looking thinner. The number of times I've heard this said to a fat person who is less fat but still fat is remarkable. Is a suffix that modifies the adjective thin, which creates the word thinner. This suggests that the individual is being compared to a prior level of thinness, which they weren't. The comparative word thinner inherently requires a baseline of thinness. Similarly, greater requires an initial amount of profits to begin with. Nonetheless, people find it necessary to lie to others in a way that's predicated on a faulty presupposition. Interestingly enough, go ahead and ask the complimenter in this scenario about the thinness why they find it appropriate to lie, misrepresent reality, and bastardize the truth. You'll quickly come to realize how little people care about actual truth or honesty, as well as how oblivious they are to such things. Let's not forget that there are numerous ways that don't require lying, which could pay a similar positively resonating compliment. Meaning that people will mischaracterize and speak fictitiously rather than citing actual reality. More so, they're completely oblivious to this. And even more so, they'll viscerally argue with you about it in order to not have their sense of autonomy, intelligence, and intentions undermined. And if you point that out, they'll argue with you over that too. So, if the average day-to-day person is willing to do this, why wouldn't, bastardize speech, lie, distort, manipulate, coerce, deceive, misrepresent, try to bend the fabric of reality and warp and distort it and twist it by saying you're thinner, greater profits. Same difference. I just elaborated to you how. Maybe you gotta get out your feelings and read it, not listen to my intonation of my voice. But I just demonstrated the similarities between them. So, if the average person on a day-to-day basis is willing to do this, why wouldn't a politician or such do it? After all, lying about someone's thinness is you doing your own politicking of sorts. Isn't it? Right? There's selfish reasons why you don't say you're less fat. Go ahead and try it. I have, back in my more socially inept days. You're looking less fat. Said it a few times. And I got some lectures. I said it one time on a date with a woman. That's a story of its own. We could talk about that if you want, but not right now. Tangent over. So I like this one. Yes on 3 Florida. It says, let's fix this. Step 1. Executive agency creates applications, appoints a panel of 4 judges who blindly score redacted applications, awarding 5 initial licenses. Repeat process each time patient count exceeds threshold, so that today there are 25 existing companies and 22 licenses waiting for government DeSantis to award. Step 2. Supreme Court strikes down amendment language with both homegrown and legalization as a violation of single subject, making it impossible to include both in one amendment in Florida. Governor and legislator ignore repeated pleas for home grow and program expansion. Step 3. Make it a felony for more than 2 ounces of flour and any amount of marijuana oil. Arrest thousands of Floridians for both. Step 4. File an amendment and get over 1 million signatures because Floridians are sick and tired of the government not responding to the will of the people. I like that. But hey man, who can argue with that when you got this? It's not for weed, it's for greed. Like I said, it rhymes, so it must be true. It would really help if Trulieve had ample profits. They're still treading water. Is that really greed? But you have to understand that when someone is so stupid to take a shot based upon greed, that you're immediately past the point of diminishing returns. Let me be clear here. I do not think that Trulieve will get to be a monopoly if Amendment 3 passes. If I did, I would be buying a lot more shares of Trulieve. Why wouldn't I buy a cannabis monopoly in one of the most heavily traveled and populated states? And if they are a monopoly, then why are other companies building out their operations in Florida? Like Green Thumb, Consortium. Why are they making more stores? Like, because if big brain DeSantis knows that Trulieve's a monopoly, then I would hope that Ben Kovler knows that they're a monopoly. So then why would he invest in the state in which someone else is a monopolist? Like, that seems ignorant. Unless there's so much spoils and richness that even if you just pick up the breadcrumbs, you could feed yourself forever. Like, but that's not Florida though. So also, why are other companies lobbying for Trulieve to be a monopoly? That's what this piece of propaganda below is demonstrating. Vote no on 3. How much does it cost to buy your way onto Florida's Constitution? And here we go. We got Air Wellness contributing $500,000, Cureleaf $2 million, Trulieve $87.7 million, Verano $3.5 million, Green Thumb $500,000. Like, why are all of these people spending this money in a state that Trulieve is a monopoly in? It doesn't make sense. Nor does what they say make much sense, which is, how much does it cost to buy your way onto Florida's Constitution? Their loaded question could be phrased differently. How much does it cost to have a statewide scandal in which republicly elected officials are bribable? Yet again, why are these people openly publicizing this? But between what I mentioned about the Ron DeSantis comment, I believe it was, and then this, it's like maybe keep that a little hush-hush. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed today's article. Having the capacity and willingness to engage in critical thought can go a long way. Essentially, don't be a puppet. And in that spirit, let me share with you one more propaganda piece. The irony of the closing image is that it's directly targeting people who, unbeknownst to themselves, are puppets. Amendment 3. They wrote it, they rigged it, and they want you to fall for it. And you know what they say? If it rhymes, it must be true. And it, that's rhyme. Thank you for watching. Until next time.